the difference between subcreation and craft, and if perhaps the rings of power made by the elves was not subcreation.
The side effect of the war caused good chunks of the war to be sunk. It was a nice little experiment.
If Tolkien wrote the story with Helm Hammerhand as the main character, that's the way it should be.
From mountains high to dungeons deep, there's a lot of Tolkien lore to keep. Heroes bold and villains vile, going through it all's gonna take a while. By land or trees or even stars, we're gonna shed some light in this time of ours.
Welcome, everyone. First episode of the podcast. Welcome to the library at Undertower. I'm Tucker Morin, my co-host here.
Ethan Frost.
Here we are. Yes, this first episode of our podcast. This is going to be a Tolkien-based podcast. We went with the name Library at Undertower. That is a Tolkien reference in and of itself. After the events of Lord of the Rings, then a lot of the history got recorded and stored in several places. One of them was in the Shire, at the library at the town Undertower. So, we're hoping this is going to be kind of a, a more friendly, relaxed, but still informative a podcast, kind of like being at a nice library.
Yes.
All right. Cool. All right. So there's that. So I'll talk a little bit, this is the first episode, talk a little bit about kind of the structure we want to go with. So we were hoping to have something that for all, like any possible level of Tolkien enjoyer. So I wanted to start by going into a little bit of backstory, talk about some lore, just the lore. So if all you want is a cool story, we got you covered. After that, we're going to go in and we're going to use that story and that lore to have a deeper discussion about what the story's saying, some of broader philosophies that can apply to it. Go more into that. And we also want to have some regular debates on some things. It's kind of fun to debate in a friendly, relaxed kind of way. They'll be a little more structured. The debate's not just going to kind of talk randomly. We will give each other time to speak, go back and forth a little bit. Because that's honestly one of the most fun parts about being a fan of Tolkien, is that people just don't. There are some things that people just cannot make up their minds about, and it goes on forever. And Tolkien's work is so complex and so rich that there's a lot to talk about. So this is going to be good.
All right, thank you very much. So we're talking about the Rings of Power for the lore, correct?
Yes. Today the first episode we're going to do the creation of the Rings of Power. Then we're going to talk a little more about subcreation. I think that'll be a good start off to a Tolkien podcast.
Yeah.
He'd made his whole world because he believed in subcreation. That's what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
I think that'll be good. And at the end of that, me and Ethan are going to have a quick debate about the War of the Rohirim movie.
Yes. I know this one has been a long time coming, and although many of you probably it's a done and deal thing, or we had a little brief discussion about it once, which inspired this podcast. So we felt like we should get this one out of the way for other more
the people listening to our discussion were like, wow, you guys should start a podcast. That'd be really fun to hear. So we're like, yeah, okay, let's try it out.
Yeah.
So funny enough, the War of the Rohirrim debate we're going to have today is the reason we started the podcast. Okay. We're going to start off, let's do it, the creation of the Rings of Power. So a lot of people are familiar, because of the movies, you may have read the books, with the One Ring, the Ring of Power, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them.
Yeah.
But, if you didn't know, there are actually a lot of rings of power and Sauron's is just the most powerful.
There were around 19 of them,
Yes.
to be exact.
I think that's true.
Yes.
Yes. So before we get too scattered, we'll get some backstory on kind of the situation in Middle Earth when this was happening and where the Rings got founded. So at the end, it was called the First Age. Then the big bad guy, Morgoth, is pretty much like the devil of Middle Earth. He gets put into like prison, and but the war that put him in prison was extremely destructive, and so there is a huge swath of land that gets covered in water. So the face of the world is reshaped.
I think we also need to tell our listeners briefly, Morgoth, at the end of the First Stage, he used his power to mar Middle Earth, so a lot of stuff had to, since they could not be recovered, that which could be saved was left, but there were other parts that just could not be healed in time, so they had to sink it beneath the waves. The war was an added destruction to it. Am I correct, or did I misread that part?
I personally didn't hear anything about the Valar deliberately sinking anything. I mean, I know Morgoth corrupted Middle Earth from the beginning of time. He's been corrupting stuff.
Yeah, that. Never mind. But
it was my understanding
Yeah.
that the land sunk just as an after effect.
I
war.
agree with that.
Okay.
I agree with that. Yeah,
Maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But to provide some context, the war, like what he said, which was said, war sunk. The side effect of the war caused good chunks of the war to be sunk. However, Morgoth's power did a lot of damage to it, and that provides just some more context.
Okay.
You can keep going. I did not mean to interrupt.
That's all right. Well, we're both going to be going back and forth the whole time.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so in the after effects of that, then there are two major elven kingdoms that rebuild. One is called Lindon. Lindon is at the seashore, and it goes up to the mountain range of the Ered Luin. And the second one is on the other side of that mountain range. That's called Eregion. And so, I guess let's know, in Lindon, we have three big characters there. We have the High King Gil-galad. We have Elrond, you probably know him, and Galadriel, you probably heard them. They're all living in Lindon. Eregion, that's where a lot of great elvish craftsmen go. I think
Had an order called the Gwaithí Mairedain.
Yes.
Am I correct? Yes.
that's what they're called.
Yes.
It's just an order dedicated to creation, to making cool stuff, which I think is a good segue into Annatar. Do you want to talk about Annatar
Yes.
a bit?
Annatar came to the Elves of the Gwaithí Mairedain and said, I'm here as a guest of the Valar, on behalf of the Valar, to teach you smith crafts. And the elves had a lot of moments. There were some, I think you could say, guilt over what happened, but a lot of them wanted to create Middle Earth to make it like a paradise, would you say rival the Undying Lands or serve as a good substitute to the Undying Lands?
That's a really interesting question. And to answer, actually, there's a section I wanted to read really quick. Annatar, who is, spoiler alert, actually Sauron.
Yeah, I was going to say he had ulterior motives, but yes, Sauron
Annatar is actually Sauron in disguise. Let me see. Here's what he has to say. Yes. So on the question about whether they were trying to make Middle Earth to rival or be a substitute for the Undying Lands, for like a paradise, here is what Annatar has to say. Alas, for the weakness of the great, for a mighty king is Gil-galad, and wise in all lore is Master Elrond. Yet they will not aid me in my labors. Can it be they do not desire to see other lands become as blissful as their own? But wherefore should Middle-earth remain for ever desolate and dark, whereas the elves could make it as fair as Erisea, nay, even as Valinor? And since you have not returned thither, as you might, I perceive that you love this Middle-earth as I do. Is it not then our task to labor together for its enrichment, and for the raising of all the elven kindreds that wander here untaught to the height of that power and knowledge which is to those who are beyond the sea? So I would say that the elves, they wanted that, they wanted that paradise. They wanted to rebuild and to beautify. This is in the elves' nature. And then Sauron, disguised, comes in and he puts the thought of making it a rival, because he just can't help himself. That's the nature of evil. He can't help himself but to tempt them with greater deeds and great feats and make it to rival Valinor itself. I don't think that was their initial intention. They did long for that beauty, but they also didn't want to leave Middle Earth. And so Sauron used that to his advantage.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But I feel like a little bit of, because Tolkien does not tell everything what's going on in their heads. He just he acts like he translated this work from the Red Book.
Yes.
And this leads me to think since several of the elves in Eregion, they were Noldor elves, right?
Yes.
Who followed Feanor during the whole things that happened, correct? Or
yes,
am I
especially in Eregion.
In Eregion. So my guess is, what my initial thoughts were, they wanted to heal Middle-earth as sort of like an atonement for the sins they've committed during the First Age, since several elves were involved in some deeds like several kinslaying and other horrific actions and such. So
it could be.
Yeah.
I think that's very fair to say that some of them wanted to do this act of atonement. I mean, again, like you said, Tolkien doesn't tell us exactly what every elf was thinking, because this is
I know
this particular, what we're talking about right now is mostly in the Silmarillion, and that's more of a history.
Yeah, I know.
And so it's hard to say for certain, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
I think that's a fair thing to say.
Yeah, I recall reading somewhere, but I don't remember anywhere. But I just wanted to confirm if I read it correctly or it was a mistake.
I also think it's fair because, later on throughout the Silmarillion, you'll see there are lots of elves that went with Feanor that do regret it afterwards, and they do want to do things to make atonement for it. A lot of them very quickly think, oh man, that was probably not the best thing to do, but it was too late by that point.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fair thing to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes. So the rings, so with that speech, then he is able to convince the elves of Eregion to work with him. High King Gil-galad and Elrond do not trust Annatar, and so he is not allowed in the Kingdom of Lindon. But Eregion, which was where a lot of the craftsmen were, they totally embrace it. They jump on it. They're like, heck yeah, man. And now Sauron, he is in Middle-earth, there are different tiers of beings, and he is on a higher tier than the elves. And so they do gain a lot. He teaches them a lot of stuff.
He served under the Valar.
Yeah, he's a Maiar.
The Maiar who served under the Smith Valar, right? So he would know a lot of stuff.
Yes, and then he worked for Morgoth, who was all about, who was very similar. So about corrupting things and and Morgoth made a ton of stuff. Yeah. Even though it was all bad, he made a ton of stuff. But anyway, so the elves, they gain a lot, and they are loving it. The elves of Eregion are loving it, and they're making cool stuff. And Annatar convinces the elves, he helps them out, and they team up on this project of making the Rings of Power. And this is back to what we were talking about a little bit, with them wanting the paradise, that let's use that to talk about what those Rings of Power are supposed to do. Because that is going to come and that part's going to be important for when we have our discussion with subcreation later. So how about you, Ethan? Tell them what the Rings of Power do.
All right, so the Rings of Power, and I was only able to go by what the actual 3 Elven Rings of Power could get. So for Sauron's perspective is he said they were meant to preserve and heal, but his ulterior motive was to use them to control the elves. Right. However, they failed. The elves caught on, and the 16 rings that he made with the elves set aside. Celebrimbor, the leader of the Gwaithí Mairedain, created 3 elven rings, and from what I gather, the power of the elves and rings that we can glean information of have the power to preserve, heal, and protect.
Yes, they did, which very interesting. Go along with them wanting to make a paradise, and they make these rings of power where the purpose is, to preserve and to protect, so that the beauty that they make isn't going to fade away. But like you said, Sauron, he had an ulterior motives, and so when he put on his one ring to try and control their minds, elves knew he was there, and they immediately took them off. And that really ticked Sauron off. Oh. Like, he spent a long time planning this out, getting these rings made, and so he immediately cuts all ties, and he declares open war. And he tells all the elves, you're going to give me back those rings, because you could have made them without me anyway, and they're my property. And
I think Sauron was also ticked because he heard the elves made the 3 elven rings of power without his knowledge behind his back. And so he was also ticked as a matter of an ego sort of trick. Like, these elves,
I know,
put the wool over my eyes. I'm a mayor. I am better than this.
But he wasn't, and they did. And so Sauron is able to get back all the rings except the 3 that the elves made without him, because those 3 were not touched by him at all, and so he couldn't control them through them. He couldn't find them as long as they weren't used openly. So those rings were kept in secret. Those are it's Narya, the ring of fire, Nenya, the ring of water, and Vilya, the ring of air. Fun fact, Gandalf had the ring of fire. So when he's talking to the Balrog, he's like, I'm a wielder of the secret flame, where the dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. That's because he actually is he has the elven ring of fire. So he is more powerful than the Balrog in fire. So,
it was originally another fun fact. It was originally given to Círdan, but when Gandalf came, Círdan gave the ring to Gandalf and said, I have a feeling you would need this more. I have a feeling you are meant to have this ring. And Gandalf took the ring with that. So another cool little
also thing. Just the name of the ring of water, Nenya. It's like when Sauron interrogating someone, like, where's the ring of water? Nenya business. I just can't get over that little linguistic.
I would love to see. I would love to see Celebrimbor say Nenya business.
Yeah, he was Celebrimbor. Yeah, that's right. Because Sauron interrogates Celebrimbor to get where the rings are, and Celebrimbor does not tell him. That's totally what happened. Sauron was torturing Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor just goes, Nenya business.
That's probably why Sauron got so ticked he turned Celebrimbor into his own standard bearer. That happened. That's still tragic, but the actual Celebrimbor went down like a champion, even though he made terrible mistakes leading up to that.
And he did acknowledge he was fooled. But anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So now we'll get into let's talk briefly about what happened to the rings, kind of like, where they go. So Sauron declares war, gets all the other rings. What does Sauron do with all these rings that he has?
Well, 7 were given to the dwarves, and 9 were given to men.
There we go. Yeah. I always think this part's funny too, with the the dwarves, where he gives the rings to the dwarves, trying to corrupt their wills. And it also fails spectacularly, where instead of the dwarves being submitting to his will, it just makes them more stubborn. And they love gold even more than before.
I've noticed when I was doing this trait, the rings amplified some of the questionable or quirks of each of the particular races. Like for the elves, preserving and healing is good. However, sometimes, at least in Middle-earth, things just die. Things die. Like death and rebirth, that's a constant cycle. Sometimes, and the elves understood that. That's why after the defeat of Sauron, they left at the end of the Third Age. They understood the world they were trying to hold on to, it just did not work anymore, and so they left, taking their rings with them. For the dwarves, I would say their desire for craftsmanship, mining, wealth, it amplified it. Did not end well for them. Although every single mountain of wealth was built upon a dwarven ring, virtually all of them were destroyed by dragon fire, because what does wealth do? Attract dragons. In the Nine Rings, it amplified the trait of man, ambition. Each of these men became powerful warrior kings and sorcerers. However, their ambition, pride, avarice led to their enslavement by Sauron.
Yep. Then they became the Nine Ring Wraiths.
Yeah.
Those are the men, the kings that got the rings of power from Sauron. So he gets those, and after a while, then okay, let's back up a little bit. So Sauron is in open war with the elves, constantly at war with them, constantly attacking them all the time, trying to find the rings of power, trying to get them back, and eventually, then Sauron is defeated by a human kingdom called Numenor. Sauron gets taken back as a prisoner. He corrupts that kingdom, and it falls. We'll talk about Numenor way more later. Numenor is a whole other bag of worms. It's its own episode. It's one of my favorite stories in Tolkien's
Mine
world.
as well. Mine as well.
So let's be good. But we'll get there later. So that kingdom falls, and the refugees from that found Gondor and Arnor, and eventually Gondor and Arnor team up with the elves left, and they make what's called the Last Great Alliance, and they go on a huge war. And that's what you see at the beginning of Lord of the Rings starts with the Last Great Alliance with Elendil and Gil-galad fighting Sauron and taking the One Ring, and then the Lord of the Rings happens. Cool. Now we're all up to date with the Rings of Power, their creation, kind of a fun little summary, and what happened to them. So. Now, let's talk a little bit more about that. And when we do that, then we're going to talk about this idea Tolkien had that he put forward, he called subcreation. And that is a big idea, not only just in general, but within his work, is this idea of subcreation. And as we talk about it, he talked about it. There's a section in a poem he wrote called Mythopoeia that gives the piece of the poem that gives a good a visualization, I think, for what subcreation is in Tolkien's mind. So I'm going to read just a little section that will help us understand it as we start to talk about it more. Here we go. The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise, and still recalls him. Though now long estranged, man is not wholly lost nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship one he owned. His world dominion by creative act, not his to worship, the great artifact. Man subcreator, the refracted light through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues and endless combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. So it's that last sentence there that really, for me, encapsulates subcreation. That, like, the light comes down, and it is refracted into us. We're like the crystal, and it refracts out in multicolored light. That we and it creates all the different hues and different shapes, and it's beautiful, and it beautifies around. Like, the light itself is beautiful, but then it comes through the crystal, and there's more beauty going everywhere. So that is, I think, is a good visualization for subcreation.
Yeah.
And with that, I want to kick this off with a question I was thinking about lately, about the difference between subcreation and craft, and if perhaps the rings of power made by the elves was not subcreation. That, because, like, the elves earlier on, the elves invent gemstones. And that is something completely new the elves make. They just make gemstones. Like rings, especially like in like magical artifacts, that's not anything new. That was something, and like that was something that it was already being done for a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
And so my thought is like that maybe there's a subtle difference between craft and subcreation. These rings of power made are not actually subcreation. That they are actually just a refinement of a craft that was meant to preserve subcreation. What do you think about that?
I think you are onto something, because rings of power were not invented in the Second Age, I believe, or rings were already invented.
I mean, the rings were around for a long time.
Yeah.
And like artifacts that were imbued with power have been around for a long time too.
Yeah. And what you say is right. Like, they crafted this ring as a masterwork of their crafts. As for subcreation, what's the difference? Because I'm still trying to understand the difference between actual creation and subcreation. I'm still trying to understand it in terms of a dummy perspective.
That's okay. Let's see. I would say the difference, like creation, like God does creation. We are not gods, so like we can't whereas God took matter out organized and he made the world. Like subcreation it's taking what has already been created and like it is making something new, but it's off of something else.
Okay.
You know,
so it is, you take marble inside the earth has already been created, and use it to build carve a statue.
Yes. Like the first guy who's carved a statue, he was subcreating.
Okay, that's still
okay. Or as time went on, there's the way statues were carved changed pretty drastically over time. Right. Now, I would argue that eventually going from those Stone Age things we have to the Renaissance, some subcreation went on in between.
Yeah.
In between that, I would argue. It is a difficult concept. Actually, it's kind of deep, kind of high up there.
Yeah, but I see what you are trying to say, and tell me if I got this correctly or if I got it wrong. Either way works, because this is a 50-50 chance as far as I'm concerned. The rings, they were crafted with the highest skill, we could say.
Yes.
Regardless on Sauron's intent, and his intent was evil, he taught the elves how to craft as best as they could. They taught the elves, who were already a guild of masterful smiths into something greatly mastering their skills. So the elves took this craft, Celebrimbor especially, and created the Elven Rings of Power. And I'm using the Elven Rings of Power as a primary example because they were the only rings not corrupted by Sauron. And with that, they had the power to preserve, heal, and protect everything. The way, as terms like I think you can say the magic coming from it was a form of what you could say subcreation in terms of have like healing, like preserving a beautiful landscape from getting marred, preserving the light from an encroaching shadow, or protecting it in some way to ensure their defenses were the defenses of these elven realms were never breached when fighting against Sauron. Like a refraction or a reflection of the masterful light from Eru Ilúvatar and the Valar, like sort of a not exactly a purified state, but close enough for the elves to work with. At least that's my understanding of what you are saying.
Well, that's kind of interesting that you would say that, because in my mind, like the thing that makes me wonder if the biggest red flag you could say that about why the Elven Rings that might be subcreative, but then they're meant just to preserve stuff.
Yeah.
And like I said, magic artifacts have been around for a long time, so I'm not entirely certain.
Yeah. The reason why I thought of it as a form of subcreation was because it preserved the landscape for new trees to grow, if that makes sense, or for new elven generations to be born in a safe place. Granted, how an elf is born is something different and discussion entirely, which I don't think we need to go into. That is why I thought of it. But as you said, they wanted to preserve what they have. So, I mean,
right.
My own thoughts, I really don't know anymore. Don't know anymore.
I haven't quite made up my mind. I'm still kind of working through it myself too. Like a question I would ask myself then is like, okay, so does only completely original ideas kind of subcreation? I'm not sure if I would want to go there either.
Yeah,
because it's actually really hard to have a completely original idea. Everybody takes inspiration, which kind of sounds like subcreation is talking about. But then, like with the refracting of the light, then if any time you take inspiration and make some new thing, then does that is any time something is made, is that? So wait, I'm gonna thought. Okay, so craft would be like a jewelry maker. He's gonna make the same kinds of jewelry over and over and over again until his style is set.
Yeah.
But if he comes up with what if I did this new piece to it?
Yeah.
That could be okay.
Okay. Yeah.
That makes sense to me. So that would mean that the Elven Rings of Power do count as subcreation because it was a new, powerful rings have been around, but this was a new way to use them.
Yeah.
So they do. So the Elven Rings are subcreative, even though their power is purely to preserve.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad I sort of talked that out.
Yeah.
That makes more sense now.
Yeah, it makes a little bit more sense. It makes more sense to me. Yeah. And I think this is still something for us to continually think about.
Oh, yes.
And so yeah, but yeah.
Maybe in a later episode, we'll get on here and be like, hey, guess what?
Yeah.
I thought of something.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I will say while you are talking, I bring up the light going into the diamond. Light goes into the diamond, light reflects all over the place. but there could be like smaller diamonds that are less powerful that catch on to like absorb some of the light that comes out and like shoots out, like say a mix of the two colors, like say
We got subcreation.
yeah, like it's like a form of like what you said, sub creation. Like I am working on a fantasy book series of knights riding on dinosaurs.
Okay.
And it originally started out and knights riding on dinosaurs existed differently in arts, but I am adopting my own views, values, twists, and research about history on it. So my crystal that creates my sub crystal that generates the sub creation would be different than what you or someone else does.
Yes.
Or at
and
least
that, like you said, that adding of your own values, your own research, that's what makes it subcreation.
Yeah.
Like you're not just refining the craft of writing. If you were to just write, some cookie cutter generic fantasy book that, just had knights with dinosaurs on it just to get a book out there, that would more be craft.
Yeah.
But since you are making it your own, putting yourself into it, and generating something that is not like 100% brand new, but still unique.
Yeah.
That makes it subcreative.
Yeah.
Yes. Cool.
Cool. Yeah.
I would say, let's take this as a good close, and we'll have our little segue subcreation into War with the Rohirim, because it is, some degree at least has the potential. We shall discuss whether it is has subcreation in it, because it's another form of media. We're adapting the books to the silver screen. There's going to be some changes. There has to be some changes, and so there's like a lot within this, especially in the creative mediums. There's a lot of subcreative potential. So we're going to talk about the subcreation done in the War of the Rohirrim movie now. We give our various viewpoints, and like with all like good debates, there will be no definite like I won this one. We're just going to give our viewpoints. We will go back and forth a little bit, and then we're just going to end it, and we will leave it up to all of you guys to decide which side you're on. That's not the point of. I've watched several like real debates. I enjoy them, and one of the best parts is that there's no like winner. You just you talk. Yeah, so that's what we're gonna do.
All right. So
Please.
I'll start with.
right ahead.
I'll start it, and I'll give the brief background. This movie was created in the anime style, which different than because we're used to live actions, and it was created as part of the Peter Jackson universe, and I think we need to nail down. I love the Peter Jackson films. I think he did great. Feels heartwarming, or at least from my perspective. But he did leave out a lot of things and changed a lot of the characters, some of which I was kind of annoyed with, even I would admit. And the guy who was in charge of this project also Jackson gave the team a go ahead this blessing. He came from Japan and he worked on several Japanese anime beforehand, so he took some like Japanese anime stuff into his own little perspective with this thing. So this is like a bit of a Japanese anime guy, but with tokens. So, and it's about a war which happened.
Yes, this one is in the. Sorry, this
You
one
can
is
start.
this one is in the appendices. If you read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, there's 2 appendices, and appendices A has some stories that talk about Gondor and Rohan's history. This is in there. It's a former king of Rohan and his war with the Dunlendings. Yeah, keep going now.
All right. And this story is centered around a daughter of Helm, and Helm had a daughter in the appendices. That is what happened, but it expanded her a lot more in the stories. So story happens. Her father gets into a fight with one of his vassals. He kills the vassal in a fight. Her father is Helm Hammerhand. The vassal's son, named Wolf, goes to the Dunlendings, launches a war. Rohan loses a battle, goes to Helm's Deep. The Rohan's forces are scattered. Some goes to Helm's Deep. Others go to Durnhow, where the dead men of Durnhow live. We see it. You see it in Return of the King.
It was not full of dead men at the time.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
they were cursed during the Second Age, but anyway, something for a different thing. And Helm loses his 2 sons. He later dies in a battle. The daughter, whose name is Hera, kills Wolf, and other Rohan forces come in and save the day. Her cousin, Freyleaf. Oh, good. Her cousin Freyleaf, who is the ancestor of Theoden, Aemir, and Éowyn, takes the throne, and Hera goes off to do whatever. That's extremely basic summary of the whole movie. So
Yes, that was the movie.
yeah.
Yes, that was the movie. I guess, really quick, the summary. No, never mind. Let's not do this. Well, I'll go into a little bit later. So, with that, I guess, how about Ethan? You just start. How about you give your take on the movie, then I'll give my take, and then we can reply to each other. Let's just give your take on the movie.
Okay. I thought it was a good film. I did not like Rings of Power.
Okay, let's talk about War of the Rohirrim, but yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I'm sorry, I could not resist. But I thought it wasn't bad, all things considering. It was a nice little experiment. I know the crowd, the fandom, did not ask for a film in this period, but to be honest, I did not exactly ask for a Lord of the Rings trilogy either, but I still personally enjoyed it, and I thought it was good. I thought the story was nice, and I actually took it to see a friend of mine, and he enjoyed it as well. So basically, I thought it was a good film. There were some creative liberties, like they included the Eagles a lot, and they borrowed elements of other characters. Like they turned Hera into like another Éowyn character, and Freyleaf into something that resembles Éomer. There was a Grima Wormtongue in there, and they did a lot of callbacks to the Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I could see, some of which I understood because they wanted the average film goer, to connect the various films together. But I thought it was a good film, personally. Okay. I know there were flaws to it, but I thought it was a good film.
I didn't like it, and like again, also like Ethan, I certainly dislike Rings of Power more than War of the Rohirrim, but I still didn't like it. One of the things, I guess I'll start with my simplest grievance, like putting in the eagles and like the Watcher in the water attacking the elephant, like that's on a similar level to me as like in the Hobbit trilogy when those giant worm things come out of the ground.
Okay,
like they're just putting in as many big creatures as they can to wow the audience, to be like, oh, look at this cool fantasy world. And that like this, it was kind of annoying. Okay. Like, you know, there's a time and a place for that, and just throwing in as much as you can to make people think about the Lord of the Rings movie while they're watching this movie, it was kind of cheap, in my opinion. Deeper grievance, essentially, like you said, it's okay. My deepest grievance is mostly around the character Hera. Okay. And like you said, like she's like, you said they made her like another Éowyn. like, I hate that. She is not another Eowyn. Eowyn, yeah, she's a woman who can sword fight, but there's so much more depth to Eowyn and her whole story arc. The extended movies, the extended editions of Peter Jackson, she even gets the whole thing. She doesn't in the theatrical. That's okay. Anyway, so that like Eowyn's arc of this, like Eowyn wanted to be a warrior because her culture said that's how you got glory.
Yeah.
Like and
Yeah,
so and
that's-
this, like but once after the events of the Lord of the Rings and her being Faramir, like she changes from that.
Yeah,
And she acknowledges that there is a better way than that. Like she's this Hera was there to make a woman the main character. That's why yes, and yeah, like you said, in the appendices, Helm Hammerhand has a daughter. She is an unnamed character who only exists so that Helm Hammerhand's vassal can try to marry his son Dwarf to her, which starts a war. That is why she exists in the appendices. And I recognize that when you're making a movie based on this book, you have to add some stuff. Like I am not against giving the daughter a name, make her more of a character. I had an issue with every time a man in that movie makes a mistake, beforehand Hera told him not to. Or how Hera is able, pretty much single-handedly saves all of Rohan. And at Helm's Deep, Helm Hammerhand, his final stand is not it's not given the screen time. He's not given the screen time that he should, and when he's at the gate, closing the gate, and Hera's people need you. He goes, no, Hera, they need you. To have Helm Hammerhand, to the audience's face, say no, the story isn't about me, it's about my daughter. When the story should be about Helm Hammerhand. And I say it should be because Tolkien wrote it that way. Okay, I personally didn't have a problem with the anime. I didn't. I didn't. I said it's different, but it was fine. People could do that. And that's subcreation. I'm fine with that. But the writers for the Rohirim movie, they were women writers, and they gave a statement. In that statement they say we were reading through the story, and there's all these strong men driving the story forward, and there's this unnamed daughter. And we were wondering, what's it like to be the daughter of Helm Hammerhand? I want to know her story more. And so they made the story about her. I don't think that should be done. If Tolkien wrote the story with Helm Hammerhand as the main character, that's the way it should be. That is my take on it. All right. Now, if you have anything you'd like to say.
I will be perfectly honest.
Bring it on.
You are right about a lot of I was not aware there were female directors who said those
writers,
words.
not directors, but
The writers who said those words. I just saw that one of the lead ones in charge was a guy who had a history of playing Japanese anime characters with rebellion, and he constantly works with rebellious warrior princesses. And I was like, okay, fine, that
makes a lot of sense, I guess.
And I was kind of working with that. I was not aware of that, but I agree with you with what you said. I admit my stance comes along with I did not notice that part.
Okay.
It just came around. My stance came around with the basic research I came across with the lead producer was a guy who had
Yeah.
thing with Warrior Princesses, and I was like, okay, it's gonna be one of those films. But I still decided to take a look. I do agree the Watcher in the water was fighting the Mumikil was a bit out of place. I did wonder what the whole idea was with the eagle was. However, I feel like of the three creatures, the eagle kind of worked, but they were just stretching it a lot. But nonetheless, but when I made my own little review with this, I was looking at it from the perspective of someone in Middle Earth, and I looked at like it would make sense since the Eagles, who are agents of the Valar, would have an interest in seeing to this conflict working out, because if Wolf took over Rohan, it would not have aided Gondor. But
Well, then I would ask with that, when else have the Valar ever taken an interest in Gondor?
well, you know what? That's actually true. They did not intervene during the Kinstrife, did they?
Nope.
All right. You know what? I did not think about that. I will admit my own look with War of the Rohirrim is it's far from a perfect film. Like the information that I have about War of the Rohirrim is like different, and I just took it as like a Japanese someone from Japan who had a unique way of looking at things decided to work with War of the Rohirrim with it right there. Of course, that's kind of all that I can say with that whole thing. I will say I am annoyed, Wolf. There were a few things I'm kind of interested. It was told from Eowyn, aka someone of Rohan's perspective, and it shows a huge difference because it is said Sauron's minions aid the Haradrim and the Easterlings to help Wolf, but from Eowyn's perspective, it is Wolf hired mercenaries, which makes sense since Wolf's father was a rich man. He could afford that. I just think it would have been cool to see Easterlings and a phalanx, the Rohirrim charging, the Easterlings. Like, Easterlings were the guys going through the Black Gate during the second movie. Like, one Easterling just smashing an enemy with, spearing a horse and, like, just putting another pipe right there. I just thought that would be cool to watch. I was rather sad it did not happen. But it was a decent experiment with how to put anime into Lord of the Rings.
Fair enough.
And impressive they were able to work together at least a halfway convincing story, in my personal opinion. That convinced me for a bit with just a handful of pages, although I respect you didn't like it. Of course, after what you said, I probably have to rewatch it again with new eyes, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right then. I guess we'll wrap it up now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Yep. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience.
Talk to you. Yeah. Talk to you next time.
Yeah.